Please join us now in welcoming Washington correspondent for News Nation, Elina Shirazi, to moderate the Crown Prince in today's Fireside Chat.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for doing this Fireside Chat. I told you earlier it's minus the fire, but we're still here together talking about this. I think it's so important what you said as well. When we talk about Iran, we are always talking about the past, and we talk about the present, but the future is something that, we don't talk about as much. And so I think that's the importance of the Iran Prosperity Project. And to that point, I wanted to talk to you about, you said this is different because this is actually rooted in concrete plans. So can you talk to me about that, go into that, and also how you've seen this evolve, because this is a evolving project and discussion?
Well, first and foremost, I would say that the only way you can get to a better future is to start with a proper vision, and to be able to convey this vision in a sense that the average person will understand in terms of a roadmap of how exactly are we going to get there. For years, I've been struggling with how can we create as much cooperation and unity for those who stand against this current regime as an alternative to this religious dictatorship to have a truly secular democratic future. And we all know that we are quite diverse in terms of opinion and political ideas, but when it becomes a matter of national interest, I believe that there are things that are above our political differences that unites us for a common purpose. And to have a nation that has faith that they can achieve that future requires that all hands on deck be present. And this is what I've been trying to do, to try to mobilize everyone. And beyond just the obvious, when we say democracy, human rights, liberty, which is motherhood and apple pie, as they say here, but does it necessarily put bread on the table? How are we going to get that part done? So for years, I've been thinking, parallel to whatever we're doing politically, what can we do to actually bring about the kind of talent, know-how, and competence that it takes to provide solutions to the problems, to remedy all issues that we are facing. And I started with the idea that perhaps by mobilizing at first different experts in their own lane to propose whatever they think will expedite the process of bringing our country back on par in all the areas that we have already started to talk about today, from healthcare to environmental issues to economic issues and so on and so forth. The number one issue, of course, is immediately after the collapse of this regime, we'll be entering a very sensitive phase. And that perhaps is the most critical aspect of addressing the crisis first, to be able to have a stable outcome and not have an implosion that leads to more chaos or instability. So the first priority was, and the first phase of IPP was to focus on the immediate future, which is why the first round of focus has been, how do we stabilize the situation first, to then be able to address the midterm and then ultimately the long-term prospect of this roadmap. So we are here today in this first phase of addressing the immediate and be prepared, because the whole idea was to have not only the plans, but to know that there is an actual way of immediately hitting the ground running. I didn't want us to get to the situation that now we are faced with a change of regime and start scratching our heads and say, well, now what do we do? But to have an actual plan ready to go. And of course, as you know, everything depends on how many resources we can collect. So at first, we have volunteers who have dedicated their time and work to it. I hope we can expand on that, get much more participation, and we welcome all the experts to come in. And of course, to have more resources to conduct more conferences, more seminars, and to be able to fund a lot of this, because as you know, we're not depending on any government budget or funds, but this is mostly coming from private support. So I think this kind of interaction is important to make sure that we can get IPP up and running and get much more out of it. This is just, as I said, the beginning of the process, and that's where we are right now.
And you said all hands on deck. So you see regular, everyday Iranians inside and outside of Iran being involved in this.
Absolutely. I mean, the whole philosophy that I've had in terms of my political vision is that what will be different in Iran's future is we're talking about participation, as opposed to a passive society that has always been accustomed to depend on government to do something for them. It's a two-way street. Government has to serve the people, but people also have to assume their share of responsibility. Let me give you an example. Let's say we are trying to fight corruption. Let's say that we have the best legal system in place. But is it sufficient to address the issue? Because even if you have the laws, if you have a corrupt police officer or customs official or judge, how are we going to address that if society itself is not willing to pay bribes anymore to survive? Because this regime has created a climate of distrust. For survival purposes, people have learned how to cheat, how to steal, how to lie. This doesn't change overnight. That requires a culture. That requires an attitude that is all based on, do we have hope for a better future, or do we have apathy and don't care anymore, and we're just trying to survive for our own? This is also part of the equation. So what I'm trying to stress here is that it's not just enough to have the plans, the idea, and the vision, and the right structures and institution. Society itself has to be willing to assume responsibility. It takes two to tango. It's a two-way street. So this is an important message to convey beyond the expertise, beyond the talent, but also to invite people to consider this as their own project, to participate in it by knowing that they'll be the first beneficiary of its result, but to understand that we can no longer be passive in modern Iran of the future. Every person can make the difference. As we say in Farsi, قطره قطره جمع گردد وانگهی دریا شود. That really means a collective action, collective responsibility. So I hope that beyond just what we propose through IPP, the idea, the projects, the expertise, that people understand that if they don't participate and only are there with an expectation, we will never achieve the maximum result that we hope to achieve. And hopefully, this will be an element to create the motivation, go back from a process of distrust and indifference to now, I'm really willing to roll my sleeves and do my share and my part to rebuild our future.
There's always skeptics with everything, right? And, the questions of could economic collapse lead to some sort of chaos? How does the Iran Prosperity Project address that specifically?
Well, that's again, one of the reasons we came up with IPP, particularly in the first phase, is that through all that research, all that, with empirical data, this is not just, based on just empty promises that we heard when Khomeini was on his way back, promising free electricity and free water, and all the rest is now for everyone to see. That, as you can see, and you've already witnessed some of it in the research that was presented by our experts, that everything they say is based on actual data, and it's all scientifically based on, as a result of that analysis, what is the course of action. And the only way we can prevent crisis is to, in fact, show that, no, there is a solution to the problem, it's manageable, it's doable. I think the biggest challenge we will face is how soon can Iran come out of this era of sanctions and economic limitations and what have you, so we can have the maximum amount of support to address all the areas that have been discussed today. This is, as I said, just the beginning, but that's really a project that is ongoing. This is why everybody should get involved. And the world needs to understand that even though this is primarily on the Iranian people's back, but they are not alone in this, that the world understand that Iranians are their true partners for a better future, not a regime that has been warmongering and has been the cause for all these mishaps. And that probably will expedite the process of saying, now we know who we're talking about. Now we know who are we dealing with. Are we dealing with a regime that is trying to destroy a country and wipe it off the map of the world? Or are we talking about a nation that says we want to have friendly relationship and cordial relationship with our neighbors, that we have common interest and the value system? Perhaps that's the most important issue to understand, that the values that Iranian peoples cherish is the same of the free world, totally and diametrically opposed to a regime that has proven in 46 years, how far they are from those values and how much against these values they are. We were talking about transparency in one of the panels. The regime has not just forced a veil on women's head, they have veiled everything else. You don't know what's going on behind that screen. Transparency is the quickest way to earn the people's trust back again. And that goes into implementing all of that in every aspect of what we do in Iran. Transparency will lead people to feel more responsibility and accountability. As I say, it's a two-way street. So hopefully all of this process will be this culture that we hope to very quickly reestablish. And we had that before, by the way. It's not that we're trying it for the first time. But imagine whatever Iran was able to accomplish in the mid-20th century, 10 times more, perhaps 50 times better than what we used to have, because we learn from our mistakes, we adjust, and we use the best possible models that apply to Iran. You talk to Switzerland, to Korea, to other countries, what will work best and will be adaptable to Iran. And I think there are tremendous amount of expertise and experience that will equip us with the best possible solutions to the problem. Some might have to be variables of which government at the time is in charge to make some decisions, but at least the roadmap is there for them to utilize and implement.
Speaking of other countries, foreign investment, Iran in the global marketplace, you know, we all get by with the help of our friends, and other countries are going to be a huge part of the success in that, you know, with Western allies, you know, Israel, Iran, China, Russia, as part of the Iran Prosperity Project. You know, this China, of course, is one of the biggest clients, let's say, of Iran's oil. So how do you see this playing out in terms of the global marketplace in a world where Iran, post-regime, would be free?
Well, I think we can, to some extent, allude to what was existing before the revolution, the kind of relationship that Iran had, also in the field of economics and trade and commerce with the rest of the world. And in fact, how much Iran was viewed as some model to emulate. From Korea to some countries in Africa, they would come and see how things are getting done in Iran. Unfortunately, all of that took a complete downturn as a result of this incompetent and corrupt regime. So I think the vision of an alternative Iran will certainly be a welcome breath of fresh air to many. And I would like to add on that subject that indeed, if you have a 360-degree vision, because let's not forget that in that era, it was a bipolar world. We had the Soviet Union and the communist world versus the free market economy and the free world, and that was sometimes a bit limiting. But I think that in this era where we can see a different way of addressing the issue, how important Iran is strategically, geographically, and where it's located, and the potential it has as probably the most untapped market for foreign investment in particular, something we will drastically need, should invite everyone to look at it differently and to understand that there's a lot of potential for that. And as long as we have a sane, dedicated, non-corrupt, transparent system, that will probably be an element that will inspire them and it will encourage them to consider Iran seriously as the next frontier for getting involved, and that's worldwide.
And I mean, you basically touched on it, but you believe that investors in America, outside in the world, they would see Iran as a very attractive opportunity, to your points, in that post-regime world.
Well, even before we started implementing IPP, I took some time over the last few years to meet with various representatives of the world business community, entrepreneurs, CEOs, and people who basically are doing that day in and day out. And I tried to take the temperature and see what would they think of whether there would be any interest for them, for instance, to look at Iran. And to my surprise, and far beyond my expectation, I noticed that the enthusiasm for that is huge. In fact, I'd like to share with you a little anecdote. Many years ago, I was participating in a conference. It was right after 9/11, so the subject matter was mostly dealing with the aftermath of it. But it happens that this conference was in Beaver Creek in Colorado. And the CEO of the resort that was in charge of the entire process came to me and says, you know what, I would love to be able to come back to Iran and help you rebuild the whole ski resort infrastructure. And I said, how come? He said, well, my father was stationed in Tehran in the mid-70s, and I learned how to ski in Dizin. And I'm sure there are so many examples similar to that of people who have been in Iran, whether they're Americans or Canadian or Swedes or French or what have you, who know how much that country has potential and some kind of a link they have to that country. So it was not a hard sell, to be honest with you. We just have to create the climate and the opportunity. As Bugsy Malone said once, we build it and they'll come. And that's what we're trying to do with Iran.
And real quick to that point, the diaspora, Elon Musk even says, all my engineers are Iranian. He says that all the time, right? How do you see Iranians rebuilding after post-regime, after the collapse? How do you see them rebuilding?
Well, I hope that we can have people like Elon Musk have a Tesla plant in Baluchistan to immediately have an impact. And we promise you, Elon, we won't put it on fire, at least not in Iran.
I think that is it for me, and I know you wanted to give some comments at the very end. So unless there's anything else you wanted to touch on.
Well, as a parting thought, you know, I think the first question in a leader's mind is, what's the mindset of society? Where are people at? Are they happy? Are they sad? Are they confident? Are they nervous? Are they depressed? Are they enthusiastic? And look, when you look at, we talked about suicide in Iran. We talked about so many aspects that is directly tied to having no hope. Well, how do you reverse that? What are the elements that make them conscientious, make them willing to make the sacrifice? When they see that opposite incompetence and corruption, we have dedicated and competent people replacing what it takes to rebuild that country on every aspect of government or private sector. That's the way you reverse people from having apathy to actually say, now we have a real chance. Now it's a true promise. Now we can have faith back in our system. We can trust the government. We can trust the institutions. It's a building process. And that's the quickest way, because my thought has always been, how do we move the needle from hope to belief? All these years, I've heard fellow Iranians coming to me and say, Umidvarim, umid darim. We hope that the situation will change soon. And I said, you know what? We have to move beyond hope. We have to start believing that it can actually get done. We don't lack the resources. We don't lack the talent. All we need is to have the right plan, as well as competent people who will be in charge of responding and be responsible for their country. Concern, dedication, and patriotism is not just a slogan, it's a necessity. You have to start caring about your fellow countrymen. It has to be a system that addresses every individual's rights. That's true. But individuals cannot expect to have progress unless they're willing to think themselves as a collective effort. And if we can institute in people the vision that it can be done, then I think that's the game changer in terms of everything that we are addressing. So what I'm trying to say is that beyond the expertise, beyond the talent, and beyond the competence, which is of course necessary, there has to be also a change in attitude. And I hope that by offering the Iranian people this vision, that it can be done, then people's attitude will change, without which all of this will never pan out. So that's where we're starting, and hopefully we'll be able to generate more and more. And I would say, especially to the members of the diaspora, you have experienced life in free countries. You have understood how the governments are kept in check, how the legal system protects deviation from the rule of law, and so on and so forth. And that experience is invaluable as helping those who be in charge of building our institutions at home to know that they have your backing, they have your support, they have your knowledge and talent and experience, because that's transferable to the nation. So I encourage, beyond what experts are doing today, to make these conversations as public and as regular as possible. Because the more we talk about it, the more we expand on everyone that can be affected and touched and mobilized as a result. So don't rely only on the efforts of our experts, which is, of course, a first step. Be engaged, get involved, talk about it. That's the quickest way for us to spread the world. It's a fireside chat without the fire, but guess what? We have to light a new fire, a fire of enthusiasm, a fire of hope that will transform us to people that say, hey, you know, we're not lacking the potential. We have it. It's only a matter of time before we get it done. That's how you get started. And I hope that I was able to convey this message today, and of course, as we go along in the future. Thank you. Thank you so much.